We're here at IPrA 2018 with Catrin Rhys from Ulster University. Thank you, Catrin, for agreeing to take part in this interview. It's very, very kind of you. So I think my first question was really how you got interested in linguistics, maybe before your PhD.
Linguistics, that goes a long way back. So I was probably not the most studious of school pupils, but had a kind of flair for languages. So languages was what I could do without doing any work, really. So at sixth form, I opted to do French, Latin, German, Spanish and Greek in sixth form, which kind of limits you.
Yeah.
Particularly because I had no interest in the kinds of things that people who do languages do. So I had no interest in history, no interest in literature, and somebody somewhere, and I don't know who, but I'm very grateful, said, "Oh, you like linguistics." So I said, okay. Applied for linguistics and stayed there ever since.
And was there any particular people that kind of inspired you in the linguistic field?
I had some very inspirational lecturers. So particularly as an undergraduate, the syntacticians who taught us, they had that wonderful combination of absolute passion for data, in a very different way from CA researchers would, but a real passion for data, a capacity to be incredibly clear and tidy and insightful in how they spoke about the data. But that also made them very good teachers, so it was incredibly well taught. So by the time I'd been through 4 years of a linguistics degree, syntax, that was where I wanted to be, because that was the most exciting part of the undergraduate degree that I did.
And was it later that you got into kind of more CA work? Was that around
That was
about the same
so
time?
much later. That came about because so I did my PhD in syntax. I actually went to Edinburgh to do my PhD because I thought, in the end I'm going to have a job, so I'm going to have to do something useful with linguistics. What I love doing is parsing, grammar, syntax, but I'll need to do something useful. So I went to Edinburgh to the Centre for Cognitive Science, thinking that I'd go in as a linguist and come out as a computational linguist and there would be jobs. But I went in as a linguist and came out as a linguist. I did the computational modules, and I kind of, for the first half you'd be doing what felt like linguistics, and then all of a sudden it would feel like you were doing programming, and I'd go from going, this is easy to I have no idea what's going on. So I came out as a linguist, and then obviously needed a job, so then I was looking for lecturing posts, and after a couple of short-term posts, kind of bluffed my way into a job that I wasn't really qualified for. So my PhD was really, it was pretty pure. It was Chomskyan, tinkering about the edges with Chomskyan syntax, but pretty straightforward Chomskyan syntax, with a little bit of syntax semantics interface. But I applied for a job in communication, language and communication. And I had to teach language and communication. Sure. And at York I'd been taught by John Local, who, everybody knows John Local. John Local brought together phonetics and CA, and, although I never got to grips with phonetics, I was terrible at phonetics, but I always found him really inspirational, and I thought, John Local really rates this CA stuff. I have to teach a second year module called Discourse and Society. I can't teach them sociolinguistics, because I knew a tiny bit, but they'd already done that. So I had to teach something else, so I thought, I'll do CA. I'll teach a week ahead of them.
So that came much...
And that's how I got into CA.
Right, so that came a lot later,
Yeah, a lot later.
I was just going to ask about your PhD and the focus on Chinese syntax. I wondered why Chinese syntax specifically?
That luck, chance. The York linguistics degree, back when I did it, they had this view that you needed to be exposed to a wide range of languages if you were going to do linguistics. So in the linguistics degree, and it was called BA Honours Language back then, it was a kind of broad conception, but you had to take a European language and a non-European language. But they were taught by the linguists. It wasn't taught by language teachers separate from the linguistics. It was an integrated part of the linguistics curriculum. So we had the choice between Hindi, Swahili, or Chinese. And I knew that if you did Chinese, you could apply to spend a year in China at the end of the degree. And the other thing that I loved to do was leave. So it was an obvious, I wanted to get away, so I did Chinese. And then, so I did Chinese as an undergraduate student, and then I had a year in China. So it was kind of an obvious thing to do. And it was also, interestingly, it was becoming fashionable to do the syntax of Chinese round about that point. And you could see it because third year of my PhD, the Linguistics Summer Institute in the US had scholarships for people doing Chinese syntax because it had become the kind of fashionable thing to do. So it was kind of in the moment too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to briefly kind of trace your steps after your PhD. So you went to the University of York and then on to Lyon in Spain.
Yeah.
And you started teaching in Lyon, or were you teaching?
Yeah, that was my first proper teaching post. Obviously,
Okay.
all PhD students do some teaching, but that was
Yeah,
my
sure.
first teaching post. And that was, I suppose a lot of people go through those kinds of posts. It was English language and some linguistics on an English language degree. So half my time was spent just doing advanced English language teaching and the other half doing kind of core linguistics.
Yeah.
And it was very much a transitional post while I was looking for something more substantively research, because there was no research in the post. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so since 1995, you've been at Ulster.
Forever.
Forever.
Forever and ever.
And you're head of department?
I am.
Head of school?
I'm head of school
Head
now,
of school.
yes. From Sens.
And you've got a role as senior lecturer in linguistics.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could maybe talk about the linguistics community at Ulster.
Yeah, I suppose like a lot of universities, we're a tiny team. So, with linguistics, each subdiscipline kind of has a person.
Yeah. So
we have, we're a little bit dominated by syntacticians because we have our historical linguist is a syntactician. Our syntactician is a syntactician who does syntax-semantics interface. We have a semanticist, and we have a language acquisition person who looks at the acquisition of syntax. And then there's me. And we're in this, and we're unusual for a linguistics team because we're in the School of Communication, so we interface with communication. We used to have speech therapy in the school, so it used to be that we were the bridge between communication and speech therapy, but then universities are always restructuring. Speech therapy moved into health sciences, and we became the linguistics team within communication. And obviously, as the kind of more communication-oriented person, I do the bridging between the communication programs and the linguistics programs.
Sure.
Yeah.
And do you cover a wide range of types of data? I mean, is there a specific focus on types of contexts at Ulster? And do you look at a lot of institutional stuff or mundane work?
So the other linguists all do kind of classic core linguistic type data. The historical linguist, she's mostly corpus data. She's Greek, classical Greek corpora. Then we have the syntactician who does the classic kind of introspective data type work. Both our acquisitionist and our semanticist, they're both experimentalists, and they both mostly do kind of child experimental data. And then I'm the person who does the kind of real data stuff. Although actually we have within the communication team, we have two other discourse people, but they're definitely much more kind of, they're quite far away in the kind of discourse, critical discourse type world, interpersonal communication type world. So I'm the only person who does the kind of real data stuff in the linguistics team. Yeah. So.
Cool, yeah. And you're also co-founder of the Ulster Centre for Multilingualism, is it?
Yeah, this is great. This is it was driven by the impact agenda in the UK HE system. So as a group of linguists, none of us really did anything that was kind of impact oriented. So there was a driver to sort of say, what do we all share an interest in that we could develop that would create a focus for doing outreach work and a focus for more impact-oriented projects. So we developed UCOM, and it was partly driven also by the fact that we were a very multilingual team. So Christina Sevdali, our historical linguist, she's Greek, so her daughter's raised English, Greek bilingual. Our syntactician, Raffaella Folli, her children were being raised with Gallic, Italian and English. And then we have our semanticist who's Italian, so his children Italian. So we had very multilingual children in the team. So multilingualism seemed to be something that we could all have a shared interest in, both personal and professional. And also in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland for a very long time was monocultural, but Northern Ireland is now opening up, and so multilingualism is still a very a relatively new thing, and having lots of languages in schools is still very new, and there are still schools that really don't have lots of languages. It's not like England where schools have become very used to having lots and lots of different languages. So, some schools maybe only have 2 or 3 children who aren't native English speakers, where other schools are beginning to have lots. So we kind of felt that we had a lot to offer to the wider community, to think about both kind of the practice of multilingualism, but also how you deal with multilingualism in schools, how you think of it in terms of health visitors. We're still very much in a world where health visitors are telling parents, oh, you don't want your child, that's going to make school very difficult, just stick to English, even though the parents aren't native English speakers. So we really felt as a team we could have something to offer, and it's been a really great way of the linguistics team add us to kind of getting out into the community and talking about linguistics and talking about values that come with linguistics and how you think about language. So it's a really good unit that we all combine in. And we run a very good project with Bernardo's, which is great for our students, where through Bernardo's we work with families of refugee families, and our students get paired up with individual refugee children who need to develop confidence in English really quickly to be able to adapt to the school environment quickly, because they're quite often arriving maybe age 7 or 8, no English whatsoever, thrown into school. The schools aren't used to having children arrive with no English, so they struggle with how to meet their needs, but want to meet their needs. So we pair up our students and individual children, and they spend effectively a semester working with them, building up their English. And what we see is their English is transformational, but their confidence and they come out of their shells, and they interact and they engage more. So it's a wonderful project that has come through UCOM. So it's good.
That sounds fascinating. Yeah,
it's good.
So just to move away slightly from your research, I was lucky enough to go to IPrA last year, and you were the chief organiser. I mean,
chief mug.
I mean, how was that as an experience of? I mean, I remember it was a huge conference.
It was massive.
Yeah.
It was wonderful, I have to say. I thoroughly recommend it. I mean, I know you're kind of very involved in ICA, so it might not be what you want to hear right now, but I really recommend it. I think IPrA is a particularly unique conference organisation experience, I think, because the association have such continuity. So there's Jeff and Anne at the head of the association who are very actively involved in the running of each conference. So there's the association plus the local team who work very closely together, and they bring that kind of continuity of experience of what works, what doesn't work, how to do it. So as the local organising team, you've got that kind of support and guidance from them that means that you're just dealing with the local organisational issues. So that makes it a wonderful experience. And then being able to influence, IPrA is such a broad conference, so if you get involved in organising it, you get to really influence the flavour of that instance of IPrA. So the lovely thing was that, being the chair of the local organising committee, I had kind of extra influence in the plenaries. So there was a definite flavour, I think, to the plenaries. And as soon as you influence the plenaries, you influence the attendance. And so the IPrA was just probably the most CA-oriented IPrA, which made it wonderful. Except that as organiser, I didn't get to go to as much as you'd like to for a really good CA IPrA, but it was great. I loved every moment of it. Did you get a lot of sleep? No. No. I remember driving back the last night thinking, please don't fall asleep before you get home. It was exhausting, and I was kind of going to bed at sort of 1, 2 in the morning and getting up again at 5. So it was exhausting. Wow. The actual, but it was brilliant. And I mean, I'm sure you know too, when you organise a conference, you do things that you don't normally do in ordinary academic life. You kind of get taken out of your academic bubble, and that's, I think, a really nice experience too. Yeah.
So just moving back to your kind of research, you've been involved in some great types of work, work with patients with aphasia and patient risks through prior to surgery, I believe. I just wondered if you could maybe talk about your research in general.
I think it's interesting. I think because I came to CA through needing to teach something, I wasn't raised as a CA researcher. So, and when I was first doing CA, it was what I used to call research by serendipity, which is why it looks so disjointed, my early kind of research trajectory, because literally bits of data would land on my desk because I was teaching it, and students liked it, so they'd want to do projects, so they'd get data. So I'd look at the data and either go, this is great, I'll support your project, or this is really great, I want to do some further work on it.
Okay.
So that's why, I was teaching speech therapy students, there's a bit of a phasic data, and then I had a student who was really into football, so I've got football interviewing data, and so it really was research by serendipity. Until more recently, when I've kind of developed a research partnership with Bethan Benwell in Stirling, and now it's starting to look a bit more coherent. It looks like I actually have a path, because she had an initial corpus of 2 sets of kind of health related data, and so we've now been kind of really steadily working through mining that data, and
And you're at IPrA to present some data. Could you just say anything about your?
So this now is the kind of main current project with Bethan, and we did a bit of work on, as you say, the preoperative assessment data that she had, which was wonderful. But now we've been really focusing in on complaints, and specifically complaints in the NHS, which is a really interesting and rich area of data. I think because complaints in the NHS, it's an institutional setting, but it's a very affect-oriented institutional setting. So when you're looking at complaints, they seem to share quite a lot with mundane complaints, but a lot with institutional complaints as well. So it's really interesting and really rich. So we presented on that at IPrA last year. We had a couple of papers at IPrA on the complaints data. We've got a couple of papers here at IPrA on the complaints data too. And it just seems to be there's so much to get out of that data. So we've looked at kind of temporal formulations. We also have looked at affiliation in the data, because affiliation seems to be so important. At IPrA, we're looking at third-party complaints, and that's turning out to look really, how third parties are referenced is turning out to look really interesting. And also experience, how experience gets used as a resource, and how it gets linguistically kind of worked up in the context of complaining, and that's very interesting too. So there's a theme there, because it's about how things kind of get formulated in the service of doing something else, which I guess partly feeds back to the linguistic background. There's always that interest in how does it get done, the how.
Fantastic. So just on that kind of moving forward type theme, do you have any plans for future research at all?
Yeah, at the minute, Bethan and I are working on a really small corpus of complaints to a particular complaints helpline in the NHS. And what we really want to do is, first of all, expand just the corpus of the complaints calls, because what we see very clearly is there's quite a lot of variability. So we know that actually if we had a bigger corpus, other patterns might emerge, or stronger patterns might emerge from a bigger corpus. But also what we really want to do is stay within this area, but look at the whole complaints trajectory, because at the minute we're just looking at that moment when somebody phones the helpline with a complaint, or they've written in and the helpline phones them back and says just to follow up on some details. But we really want to look at the journey through the NHS complaint system, and because I had a meeting with somebody in the NHS who deals with complaints, and she said, but the initial call is not where things go wrong. They make a complaint, and then if it's treated as a formal complaint, then typically there are multiple encounters through the complaint's journey between the beginning of the complaint and either resolution of the complaint, or actually the complaint getting escalated to the Ombudsman, or getting escalated to litigation. So the complaint's journey and the patient's journey through is where we want to go next, because we think all of the different institutional and personal agendas will become interesting and complex as they go through that journey. So that's what we want to do. That's where, because it just seems our corpus is so rich that if you take that journey, there's going to be so much more.
Wow.
So we'll be busy for a while.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. So finally, just a more kind of reflective question, I suppose, which I tend to do. It is to really kind of just to focus on linguistics, and really just to ask what you think it kind of brings to the table of social interaction that maybe other approaches to social interaction don't do, or don't focus on so much.
Yeah. I think this is really interesting, and it's funny, when I was first in CA, it felt to me like there weren't that many linguists around, whereas now it seems like CA has developed homes in linguistics departments, and so it seems like there are more and more linguists doing CA now. I think there are pluses and minuses about coming to CA as a linguist. I think the real strength, I think the thing that's great when you bring linguistics and CA together is that we are, as CA researchers, really interested in turn design. But obviously if you come to turn design as a linguist, you have the scope to see distinctions more quickly in turn design that maybe if you don't come from linguistics you don't see, or even awarenesses of different distinctions that linguistics provides that you potentially then dismiss as when you then think as a CA researcher. I think there's also the challenge, certainly I know in my kind of conversion from being a linguist to being a CA researcher, one of the things that my very first paper was awful, so we won't go there, but my very first decent paper in CA, I wrote twice, like completely twice. I wrote it once and I knew it was terrible, and it took me ages to work out why it was terrible, and then I realised that there's how you do the analysis and there's the evidence for your analysis, but then there's also how you provide the argumentation, and linguistics argumentation is very top down. Mm-hmm. And although I had arrived at the analysis in a very kind of bottom-up CA way, when I came to write it, I still wrote it like a linguist. I was evidencing and arguing like a linguist. I was arguing in a really top-down way. And I think it's quite hard to get away from, if your training is in that kind of very top-down, if we make these claims, we expect to see this, and look, we see this. Mm. And that's not how you really want to argue as a CA researcher. So I had to completely rewrite the paper and really work hard to think from the participant's perspective and, what is the participant doing and how are they doing it? And that rethinking how you argue takes a long time. But I think being able to provide argumentation from both perspectives, I think means that you see your data from both perspectives, which I think can be very useful, particularly if you're thinking about things like formulation and design. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.